So good evening, friends. We now have Meenal Maheshwari from Bombay. She will be speaking on jurisdictional issues in e-contracts. It's almost a follow-up of what we had. We had a discussion on e-contracts a few weeks earlier from Deepa Lakshmi, another lawyer. There was a lot of interest on the subject, and I'm sure jurisdictional issues are relevant not only for e-contracts but also for privacy uh, issues, because privacy is also being reasonably controlled through the consent form of contract. So I think whatever we discuss will also be relevant for privacy related issues. So over to you, Minal. Please introduce yourself briefly and then go ahead.
Okay. Hi. Good evening, everyone. I welcome you to today's session. Today's session is a continuation of the session where she spoke about e-contracts and their enforceability. But today we will be focusing on the jurisdictional issues in electronic contracts. And I hope that it will be an intellectually stimulating topic for all of us, and that it will lead to really fun conversations later into the presentation towards the end. So before I begin, if for anyone and everyone who doesn't know me, I'll just give a very brief introduction. My name is Meenal Maheshwari Shah. I am a corporate commercial lawyer with more than a decade of very rich experience in global transactions and global contracts. I started my journey with law firm Tan & Company in Bombay, and then where I worked mainly on Japanese, in the Japanese desk. So I represented mostly Japanese clients in their global M&A. And from there, I moved on to Times Group, where I supported their private equity investments throughout India, and I helped them set up their San Francisco business. And currently, I lead global transactions and contracting at SR Group. Amongst other things, I'm extremely academically inclined. I was a merit list holder for all the 5 years in the Pune University for around 20-30 colleges. I topped all the 5 years, and recently I've been awarded a fully paid fellowship by the UK government to come study cybersecurity at the Cranfield University. I could not go because of COVID, so I'll be going this March. Now moving on to the presentation for today. Today we will just to start. Let's start by an example. So let's take a small example to understand what is the issue that we will be discussing today. Imagine that an Indian company accepts an offer from an American company on the internet to provide services in Singapore, and the ISP, that is the server of the Indian company, is based out of London, and the server of the American company is based out of Colombo. Now imagine that an internet dispute starts between the Indian company and the American company. Now you see how many jurisdictions are involved. There are 5 jurisdictions that are involved. We have India, we have America, we have Singapore, we have the UK, and we also have Sri Lanka. Now, which country's courts should be approached to find a problem to the dispute that has arisen between the Indian company and the American company? That is the issue we will be discussing today, because that is the jurisdictional issue. Which country's courts, and if in the country, then which state's courts refer to when a dispute of this nature arises. However, there are some other issues as well that arise in internet disputes along with the jurisdiction issue. And that issue is which country's law should be applicable. In the same example that I presented to you, that is whether Singapore's law should be applicable, India's law should be applicable, America's law should be applicable, or the laws of Sri Lanka or UK should be applicable. The very, very relevant issue that arises is that even if you get a judgment from any court, in our example, let's imagine the judgment was got from the Singapore courts. But how do you enforce it? Just by having a judgment, the problem is not solved. The problem is solved. For example, Singapore court says you can claim, $1 million from the American company. Indian company, you can go and claim $1 million from American company, but the American company is subject to American jurisdiction. So you will have to take that judgment, go to America, and have the judgment enforced in America. Unless the American courts recognize that, you can't really get that money from the American company, unless they are, of course, willing to pay you out of their own will. So it is very important to see that the judgments are, what is the law on enforceability of foreign judgments in every country. But in today's presentation, I'll be focusing mainly on the jurisdictional issues because of the time constraints, and I will give a sort of closure on the enforcement laws of foreign judgments in India to sort of give a completeness to the understanding. And similarly, there will be parallel provisions in probably every country. There are actually, but you will have to study case by case basis, country wise. So now moving on to understanding what is jurisdiction. Well, jurisdiction is a non-statutory term. It does not have any definition in any statute, but it is understood to mean authority to apply the law to the acts of human beings. So you can imagine it to be like a gateway, right? Like that gateway takes you to the correct court where you can take your problem and have it solved, and everyone will have to abide by it. So that is what is meant by jurisdiction. But jurisdiction can be of multiple types. It could be territorial, it could be pecuniary, and it could be subject matter wise. What is territorial? Territorial means that, look, Mr. A, you live in my territory and I am the court here. So whatever I say, you will have to abide in case of a dispute. That is territorial jurisdiction. Pecuniary jurisdiction is based on financial limits. So Mr. A, your claim amount is below 1 crore rupees. So please don't come to me. Go to an inferior court because they have jurisdiction. Only entertain disputes above 1 crore. So that would be pecuniary jurisdiction. Then the third one is subject matter or cause of action, which means that neither maybe there is a situation, Mr. A doesn't reside, Mr. B doesn't reside in Singapore, but the cause of action has arisen in Singapore. I'm referring to my earlier example. Then you can approach the courts of Singapore, allow for jurisdiction based on cause of action, even if Mr. A and Mr. B, who are not residents of get into a dispute where the cause of action has arisen in Singapore. So that is called jurisdiction based on cause of action. So now, however, while I have spoken about 3 types of jurisdiction, traditionally, jurisdiction is always said to be of territorial nature. Because you reside in my area, I have jurisdiction over you. However, in 1945, the US Supreme Court, keeping in mind the technological advancements, of course not e-com, but at that time, trade had started happening from one state in the US to another state, etc. Started developing the principle of having jurisdiction over non-residents. The reason why I am discussing the US law at this point is because later on in the presentation, you will find that the Indian case law has on this issue has developed, keeping the case law of US in mind, and they have developed in tandem with the US. And hence it is pertinent to discuss the case law evolution or the evolution of law on this subject in the US. So as I was saying, that in 1945, the US Supreme Court came out with the test called minimum contacts test. what this test did was that it allowed the courts to exercise jurisdiction over a non-resident if a contact existed between the non-resident and the forum state, which wanted to assume jurisdiction over this non-resident. But the condition was, the qualification was that you can only take jurisdiction over a Mr. State A, sorry, not Mr., but State A, you can only take jurisdiction over the non-resident of your state as long as the traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice were met. But with the advent of e-commerce, this test started failing. The reason being that e-com has competing challenges, right? Why? What are these competing challenges? Business, customers. Business, why do people do e-com businesses? Because they are inexpensive. They are asset-light businesses, and hence you don't have to, it is not a capital-intensive business. And that's why entrepreneurs started moving towards e-com businesses to keep their overheads much lower. But imagine that just because they were, you know, everyone throughout the globe started suing them in their own country, the cost effectiveness of e-com business and the main reason why entrepreneurs were moving towards the e-com business will start to be like a disharmony, right? So that is the challenge. So that is the business challenge, right? Where minimum contacts approach the e-com businesses would be in a pickle if everyone could sue them around the world. But on the other hand, what if the consumers were not able to sue the e-com businesses in any other territory other than where they are actually physically based? Consumers are people like you and me, not as resourceful as the big conglomerates, and our bargaining power is less. If every time we have to travel to another country and for one date, another date, it would be really unreasonable. So these are the two competing challenges that were faced at that time. And it was realized that just because a non-resident had a contact with another state did not mean that that state could assume jurisdiction. So this test was tightened. The tightening test is called the sliding scale test. And it was in Zippo for the first time that the US laid down this test. Well, what Zippo said is that the defendant, the defendant must have a minimum. So just to give you a little bit of story in Zippo, what happened was that a Pennsylvania-based business sued a California-based business in Pennsylvania, saying that there was a passing off action wherein the California business was using the domain name which belonged to the Pennsylvania business. And the issue arose that how could a Pennsylvania court have jurisdiction over a California business? It was shown that because the court said that just merely because the minimum contacts test does not hold good anymore and you will have to show something more. So what the Pennsylvania business showed was that the California business has 3,000 customers in Pennsylvania. So there was a substantial relationship between the California business and the Pennsylvania business. And not only that, the California business had contracts with 7 ISPs in Pennsylvania, and where they wanted the news. So California business was a news business to allow the whatever is shown on California business's website, they wanted Pennsylvanians to have access to it. So they showed that the website of California business was a very interactive one, and hence interactive in Pennsylvania, and hence the Pennsylvania court should have jurisdiction over the Californian business because of the interactivity of the website of the California business in Pennsylvania. And so came the sliding test, where they said that the degree of interactivity of the website would determine if a non-resident, a forum state would have or would not have jurisdiction over the non-resident business. Now, however, the exercise of the jurisdiction must definitely be reasonable. The claim should be asserted by the defendant because of the contacts with the forum state, and of course, there should be a contact with the forum state. So this was then called the sliding scale test, because the more the interactivity of the website, the more chances that the forum state would have jurisdiction over the non-resident business or defendant. However, soon this test also started failing as the e-com business sort of started blooming, because the issue that started was that every time the courts will have to determine whether this much degree of interactivity is enough or whether that much degree of interactivity is enough. So it became a really subjective sort of a test. For example, imagine that a non-resident's business website was accessible in another state, but all they could do was access the website. There was a tolling number for each state, so you could, so a non-resident could make a phone call. There was an email for any grievance that was given. However, no goods or services were actually subscribed to by the forum state's members. But the website is interactive. So should a forum state take jurisdiction over the non-resident business? Is this degree of interactivity enough or not? The courts determined that it was not enough. And hence, they imported the test called the effects test. Now, the effects test is a very old test. In 1984, it was laid down in Calder. However, the courts imported this test and said that effects test would mean that along with the sliding scale test, you will also have to determine or evaluate the effects of defendant's website in the forum state, not merely interactivity, but what will be the effect. Also, the harm test was brought in, which is a part of the effects. It will have to be shown that a harm took place or an injury was caused to the plaintiff inside the forum state. And it is only then that the website owner of another state could be sued in the forum state. So it was a tighter sort of a version that was laid down. So then, so basically the sum and substance of the test was that in our example, the California business in Zippo's, let's take the Zippo example, California's business should be intentionally targeting the customers or the audience in Pennsylvania, and they should be wanting to make money out of the people that are there in Pennsylvania for their business. So if you can show that they are taking specific steps to sort of provide services or goods to the citizens of another state or in the forum state, then it will be called as intentional targeting. So the tests were becoming tighter for a court to take over the jurisdiction on a non-resident business. Now, so the combination of Zippo's sliders test and Calder's effect test came to be known as together purposeful availment test. This was applied in 2003 by the US Courts of Appeal in the case law called Toys R Us versus Step 2, where they said that in the purposeful availment test, which is a combination of these two tests, it will have to be shown that the defendant hosts an interactive page in the forum state. The defendant specifically directs activities targeting the forum state, and that the defendant's activities have an injurious effect on the plaintiffs within the forum state. So that is where the law is at in the US and is being used every time there is not a statute that is present or there is discrepancy in the contract itself as to what jurisdiction should the dispute be taken to. Now let's turn to our motherland, and we'll go a little deeper because it's India and very relevant to all of us here. So the important provisions are the general provision that is found in the CPC section 20, and we'll move on to the specific jurisdiction which are notwithstanding the CPC provision and provide special jurisdictional clauses and options to the complainants or the plaintiffs. And then we will look at section 13 in the IT Act because it's really relevant to the e-contracts. Now, what does the section 20 of the CPC say? What it says is that whenever a plaintiff wants to sue a defendant, he has an option to sue either where the defendant resides or works or carries on business. Other than that, the plaintiff also has a right to sue at a place where the cause of action arises in part or in whole. So we, by statute ourselves, are very close to, we have moved on from the traditional territorial jurisdiction, and we have in our general provisions also the concept of suing where the cause of action arises. However, there are additional avenues that are provided in other laws. For example, this is just an example, Trademarks Act 1999. What it does by virtue of section 134, it says you can go and sue you can sue someone, a defendant, where they reside or work for gain or have a business. You can sue where the cause of action has partly or wholly arisen, and you can also sue where you reside, which is a very, very convenient forum convenience for the person who's suing, because he can sue in the territory where he stays, because the legislature considered these to be special cases where they knew that the people who are suing may be people who do not have a very high bargaining power and do not have as many resources. However, this is only applicable for infringement of registered trademarks. If it's a passing of action, you still have to go under section 20 of the CPC, and this option of suing where you live does not is not available to you. Now let's move on to section 34 of the Consumer Protection Act. Well, as we all know, the Consumer Protection Act has been rewritten, and it has come into force just 20 days back on 20 days back on 20th July 2020. Well, the Consumer Protection Act also provides now the consumers the option to sue where the complainant themselves reside or work for gain or carry on business. This is a extremely relaxed provision for the consumers, but of course creates a lot of turmoil for the services and the goods providers, and especially the e-commerce platforms, because I want to bring to your attention that under the e-com guidelines, which have come into effect on 23rd July 2020, I think just a few days back, e-commerce platforms are defined as an Indian company and a foreign company, and an office, branch, or agency outside India if it is owned and controlled by Indian persons. And it is important to note that foreign company includes any body corporate that is incorporated outside India, which has a presence in India even through electronic modes. So only if the website is present in India, right, the consumer has an option to go and sue so I can sue in Bombay. Any business whose website is present in India, and for deficiency of services, for unfair trade practices, etc. So this is a big change, and it will create a lot of difficulties for the e-com platforms. Now, the reason, let's move on to Section 13 of the Information Technology Act 2000. And the reason why it is relevant to go through this provision is because I'm not sure, but maybe many of you are aware of the mailbox rule that is provided in the Indian Contract Act, where it says at which place and at what time is an offer said to be accepted, and at which place an acceptance is said to be complete. However, in the Information Technology Act recognizes that that e-transactions are different, right? So what it does is that it says that the dispatch of an electronic record occurs when it enters a computer resource outside the control of the originator, and it is said to be received if an originator sends a message, right? Suppose even if I send a message, suppose I'm traveling to America and I sign an e-contract in America, it will still be said that the contract has one of the parties of the contract has taken place in India, because my main place of business or residence is India. So no matter where the computer device is, the contract takes place from where the originator actually resides. The location of the computer server or resource is irrelevant. Similarly, with regard to receipt of a record, there is a distinction, and that's the reason why I want to bring it to your notice. Like, imagine a recipient says, Mr. A, can you please send me a record in on so-and-so email address? And he tells you a designated resource where you can send the record. If you send it to the same record, in spite of the fact that he has accessed or not that message, as soon as it enters his computer, the designated computer resource, it is said that he has accepted the message, which is different from the mailbox rule that is provided in the Indian Contract Act, where only upon accessing the message, the acceptance is said to be complete. Similarly, however, if Mr. A sends the contract to Mr. B on a computer resource that was not designated by Mr. B, then the acceptance will only be complete once Mr. B accesses the particular record. And hence, so this is sort of a very interesting thing, but very practical, and it has been provided for in Section 13 of the Information Technology Act. Now, before I move on to the case laws in India, I want to sort of complete the discussion and tell you that just by getting a decree, just a mere assumption by a court and passing of a judgment is really not enough, right? Because until and unless you can enforce the judgment and actually get get the relief that has been given to you by the court, there is really no point of that judgment. And so foreign decrees, whether they are accepted and whether they are enforceable in different nations is very important. So I'll give you an example in India. You can refer to Section 13 of the CPC. What does that say? It says that a foreign decree can be executed in India, but here you will have to file a fresh suit, and you will have to show that the foreign decree was passed by a competent court, that natural justice principles were followed, no fraud took place, and there are 3 other parameters. You will have to satisfy all the 6 parameters, and if the court agrees that yes, all these 6 parameters are are met, then it will pass a judgment and you can enforce the decree. However, you can see that it is a longish procedure because a fresh suit has to be filed. However, a shorter route is provided in section 44A of the CPC, which allows the decrees that have been passed by the reciprocating states to be enforced directly in India. So you don't have to file a fresh suit. What you have to do is you have to go to the court and say, I've got this judgment, can you please enforce it, right? Now, however, presently only 12 countries have been notified by India as reciprocating states. In January of this year, UAE was one of the other, joined the list of these 12 nations, and it takes a much shorter time because you don't have to file a fresh suit. However, the defendant, of course, can show, has the right to show that, you know, the judgment was taken, was obtained by fraud, etc. But the onus is not on the judgment creditor, it is on the judgment debtor. So it saves a lot of time if he does not have any proof to show that any of these 6 grounds is sort of not met. So similarly, like in India, you have these provisions. If you take, if we go back to the first example, I had started out my presentation where I had said that, you know, an Indian company is providing services to an American company, but the ISP of the Indian company is in London and the ISP of the American company is in Sri Lanka. Imagine you get a decree from the Singapore court, the Indian company in its favor, but what happens is that the Singapore decree that is sort of obtained from the American court is not from the Singapore court is not enforceable in America against the American company. Then really, what's the point, right? So every nation has their own law and way in which they enforce foreign decrees, and so it becomes it is on a case-by-case basis. So before you sort of approach a court, it is very relevant to see whether the decree of that nation is enforceable in the country by whose law that defendant is based out of, or the laws of that state, to whom the laws, the country to whose laws it is governed by. Now, let's move on to the case laws in India. So very quickly, I'll start with Casio. Casio, in 2003, the Delhi High Court said that just because a website could be accessible, it was a passing of action. Just because a website was accessible from India, the court said that it is sufficient for an Indian court to take over the jurisdiction over a non-resident business. However, soon these tests, just the way they started tightening in America, started tightening even in India. So in India TV, which is a 2007 Delhi High Court judgment of a single bench, here the India TV was the plaintiff, and they were running the Hindi news channel India TV, and they sued defendant number 1 and 2, who were putting out news content on www.indiatvlive.com, and said that they did not have the right to use India TV in their domain because the plaintiff, which is an Indian company, had the rights to the domain name India TV in India. However, defendant number 1 and 2 went before the Delhi High Court and said that we are American companies, and hence Delhi High Court, you cannot take over the jurisdiction on us. And instead, they went and filed a counterclaim or a counter declaratory suit in the Arizona court. While neither defendant 1 or 2 resided or had a place in business in Arizona, the reason why they approached the Arizona courts was because GoDaddy.com, from whom they had bought this domain name, IndiaTVLive.com, was based out of Arizona. And they said that because the company from whom we have bought the domain name is based out of Arizona. It is the Arizona courts that should have jurisdiction, and they wanted the Arizona court to declare that they had not infringed on on the plaintiff's trademark, which is India TV. India TV. So now that this was brought to the notice of the Delhi High Court, and the Delhi High Court said that they will have to, the Delhi High Court had the question before them whether they should take over the jurisdiction or the Arizona courts should have jurisdiction. And they decided that they will have to test it in a much deeper manner, and that mere accessibility of the website in India would not suffice for the Delhi High Court to take over the jurisdiction in this matter. Just like the developments took place in America, which I had discussed in the previous slides. Now, the Delhi High Court said that Mr. Plaintiff, you will have to establish that the defendant's activities have sufficient connection with India, that the cause of action arose in India, and that it will be reasonable for the Delhi High Court to take over the jurisdiction over the defendant number 1 and 2. So just like in Zippo, they laid down the sliding scale test. The same test was applied by the Delhi High Court, and they said that the website is extremely interactive in India. The defendant's website, even though the defendants are based out of America, their website is extremely interactive in India. They are targeting Indians because a lot of content on their channel is Indian news, and if because of the accessibility of the website in India, will the damage that will be created, that will be caused to the plaintiffs in India or not. And because the Delhi High Court found that all these questions, the answers to all these questions are positive, it held that it will have jurisdiction over the defendant number 1 and defendant number 2, and the Delhi High Court can decide the matter going forward. So that was a very interesting development in India, where from accessibility we moved to interactivity of the website. However, then came the Banyan Tree Holdings. Yes, Apruba, you're raising your hand. Okay. I'll move forward. Maybe whenever you can speak, we can sort of we can discuss your doubt or your thoughts. So let's move on. So in Banyan Tree, what happened was it was a division bench of the Delhi High Court. Again, had to decide whether it has jurisdiction or does not have jurisdiction over a non-resident's business in India. In this case, so now in the previous case that I discussed, the India TV, while they laid down a more detailed law on the subject, they did not overrule Casio. But in Banyan Tree, Casio was explicitly overruled, and they said that India TV is a good law and not Casio. But they also said India TV, the analysis is not as deep as it should be, and there should be more analysis to find out and evaluate whether an Indian court could have jurisdiction over a non-resident's business. So we are moving to exact position now that was found in America, where they said that interactivity of the website is not enough. You will have to also show that there was substantial effect of from the accessibility and interactivity of a non-resident's website in the forum state. And only then can the Delhi High Court take over the jurisdiction over a non-resident's business. So what they said is that interactivity, yes, the degree of interactivity is really important, but the plaintiff will have to show that there was specific targeting of Indians and that a harm was caused, will be caused because of the harm will be caused in the forum state because of accessibility of the non-residents business in the forum state. And they also said that the plaintiff cannot say that I propose to enter the Indian market, etc. It will have to be already present in India for it to sort of request for a jurisdiction of an Indian court over a non-resident's business. So this is the interesting development, and this is where we are at in India. But of course, a new, as I discussed, the new Consumer Protection Act and the new gives the consumers an option to sue at their place of residence and business, which is extremely interesting and provides a lot of power to the consumers. But of course, effective implementation of the law is very important. Just to before I sort of move to the solutions slide, I wanted to share that the Consumer Protection Act also allows dispute resolution over video conferencing. So the consumers do not have to spend and neither the e-commerce platform have to spend in traveling, etc. It also allows the plaintiff to argue the case by himself without an attorney explicitly says that. And so probably someone who is not as resourceful can probably argue their matter. Of course, how effective that will be is a question that remains. Now, so after discussing all of this, what are the solutions to jurisdictional issues in e-contracts when you look at it from a global level? Well, I think that it is very important for the nations to get together and come up with a uniform code to solve this issue. Because even if you get the judgment, it needs to be enforceable in the courts. In a foreign decree and its enforceability are very, very important. Are very important to this issue. So there should be some clarity where the nations get together and sort of find a clarity. Well, it is done. It is in Europe. They have the Brussels regulations and the Rome Convention to deal with this issue, but of course it's only limited to European Union. However, a larger solution needs to be found globally because of the diminishing boundaries completely and e-contracts taking place every second. Another thing for the lawyers is, of course, that whenever we draft a contract, we need to be very specific about the jurisdiction of a of an e-contract. We need to specifically provide which courts will be solving a dispute that arises out of the contract, and we should also provide for the governing law, which state's law or which country's law will be applicable. However, there is a limitation here. If many a times the courts have, if they have found that the clauses of a contract, a click-wrap contract, etc., are unconscionable and unreasonable, and the service recipient or the goods recipient did not really have a choice, and it is very unreasonable for him to have to be subjected to these clauses, it can sort of make this clause ineffective. But of course, the chances of that are much lower, and having these clauses and ensuring that they are reasonable is very, very important, because it narrows down this issue that can come up in different contexts. The third and very important solution can also be e-dispute resolution globally. For example, every country, if they allow e-dispute resolution in an e-commerce transaction or any electronic contract dispute, then it will be very helpful for everyone, because it will save a lot of logistical costs. So these are the solutions that I could think of, but I'm sure you all could have more thoughts and more solutions, and I welcome you all to share your thoughts now, and sort of, any thoughts around this subject which can make this a better discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. Well done, Minal. Let us see questions from people.
Sure. Any questions, any thoughts, anything that you want to share?
Rajesh, what?
Bed is raising her hand. Yamini Bed. And in the middle, Aruba had raised their hand. If you want to say something, please feel free.
I'm Kodandaram. I have my questions listed already in the chat.
Yeah, please.
Only
Please
go
go ahead and read out Kodanram.
Oh, you want me to read, sir? Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to know how about the operation of Section 1 of Information Technology Act with Section 75 of IT Act. Whether it has some relevance here, because they speak jurisdictional aspects very clearly. Secondly, unless there is a bilateral agreement between two countries and good relationship, it may not come through. You can see in the Vijay Mallya case how we are struggling. What is your opinion?
My opinion is that on this, my opinion is it is, see, bilateral relationships are, many times these relationships are just guidelines and not really enforceable. And that is the reason why we are struggling. It's an extradition matter. Of course, it's a different matter than e-com disputes. But what I think is, if with stronger relationships among states, if we can sort of lay down the law, like I was discussing 44A of the CPC, where I was saying that, there are only 12 nations right now that India recognizes as reciprocating nations. If more and more nations are added by India and reciprocating to our gesture, more and more countries add India as their reciprocating state, then it will of course be a great advantage, because this would mean that that country accepts that Indian judgments are fair and that they can directly enforce these judgments without further delay. So of course strong relationships between states are extremely important, and but it is a little sad that right now only 12 countries are reciprocating for India. And these countries are really small. It's Fiji, it's some Greek island of Tagos, and these are really small countries where the business volume will be really less, and a small state of Eden. So I agree with you, sir. I mean, there needs to be a stronger relationship between states to find a solution to this problem.
Kodanraman, what is your question on Section 1?
No, IT Act itself talks about the jurisdiction. Section 1, 2, I remember, if I remember, and also 75, extraterritorial jurisdictions in the Information Technology Act. That has also been expressly provided in those sections, if I am right. I don't remember. I have not for long not read through that.
Yeah, Section 1, of course, extended. At that time, it was necessary to extend it to Kashmir, so it has been done. Now that is no longer relevant because laws of India are applicable to Kashmir after this Article 370 abrogation. Now, Section 75 definitely gives extraterritorial jurisdiction in legal terms, but execution of that requires the people to go to the court here, get an order, and then take it under the treaty or any other international agreement to the other country's court, and then get a decree or whatever is that, and try for this extradition and other things. That is the judicial part of exercising jurisdiction. Say the law will be providing it, but enforcement jurisdiction is different. But we have seen in the past USA using some innovative methods for exercising this sort of enforcement jurisdiction. One case was this Dmitry Sklerov case, which was the Russian programmer who had developed a software as a project head of a larger company. That company still exists. Elcomsoft is a well-known company. This person was heading a project which actually converted the Adobe e-books into a different format. And that format, after conversion, if password was there in the PDF version, it used to get lost in the converted form, which could be a Word form or a HTML form. So Adobe wanted to take action against this company. Unfortunately, he was in Russia. So what they did was they invited him as a guest lecturer to one of the seminars. I hope they have invited. Anyway, he attended one of these hackers seminar or something like that. And he came to address the audience in America to speak about security in ebooks. So immediately after his lecture was over, he was in the US soil and the US police arrested him, and the action was initiated under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. This is one of the instances where the person in a criminal case, this is a criminal case, not the kind of cases which Meenal was referring in website and other things. This person was brought physically to the US jurisdiction and it was exercised. One more very important case perhaps Meenal could have touched was the Yahoo case, because that was one of the cases in which a lot of discussions took place. The question of if a particular website is in a language of a particular country, then that country will be able to exercise the jurisdiction. This was also discussed in the Yahoo Nazi case, Meenal.
Yes, yes, Navi sir, there what happened is that in the Yahoo case, they said, firstly, they said that language can be one of the reasons. So a website, just because a website provides in Hindi or in Portuguese, etc., it can just be one of the factors. But if the intention is not to target Portuguese customers, that is to get business from them, then having the language is not enough.
At that time, having a French Yahoo site was an indication that I wanted French customers. But today with this Google translation, today anything you right click, you get the version you want. So this test will not apply today. This is how actually the things are changing so fast. In fact, jurisdiction, if you follow, one case is decided this way, next case is decided the other way. And if you are an ordinary person, not a hardcore lawyer, you will get confused what these courts themselves don't know what to do. Okay. So ultimately we come to the conclusion that if the victim is a citizen of a particular jurisdiction, the court of that jurisdiction has a duty to protect his rights. So if you are taking it to them, normally they will take the case, but enforcement is a very tough issue. US has been able to do that. They have once got a Japanese professor extradited from Japan because Japan was a friendly country. So they have used so many, and in fact, I think one of the US court judgments say that the US police can go to any other country and without the assistance of any other local persons, they can arrest also and bring him. Like
for criminal cases, it's like that. For criminal matters, now
yeah,
what you're saying. But
yeah. So it's all a question of how strong are you in proving your rights in the court. In India, say, my view is Information Technology Act says that there is attribution. Okay, if you access something from your computer, it is as if you are accessing from the place where you are. Even the section 13 you said. So I send a message requesting for access to a website returns the handshake. So my request was here. So therefore, I am entering the virtual world of that website sitting in India. Okay. So I think that is a solution which you were asking. No? So now, where is the interaction of the Zoom happening? Now, should you think it is happening in wherever the Zoom server is there, or do you think it should happen as far as I am concerned? I am interacting from Bangalore, you are interacting from Bombay. So, and unless there is a contract to the contrary, if I send an offer, it will be an offer sent from Bangalore. If you send an acceptance, it is an acceptance sent from Bombay. Where the final acceptance is there, that is the place of contract. So if you take the place of contract as one of the indicators, there is a clear legal situation in India which can determine the place of contract. So
Yes.
if the contractual document doesn't specify the place of contract separately, this will be applicable. And maybe sometimes we have these issues come up in the arbitration case. You are talking about the jurisdiction of law as different from the jurisdiction
Seat of arbitration.
right?
Yes.
So arbitration, normally we have that kind of a situation. You apply a certain law, but the place will be somewhere else. So
Correct.
you can meet in Singapore, but apply Indian law. Okay. So jurisdiction has to be properly written in the contract. Otherwise, there is an issue. Recently, the Kerala High Court asked Kerala government regarding that Arogya Setu issue, the case, no, that is Sprinkler. See, Sprinkler was running a service on the web. So like I and you, Kerala government went and accepted the terms and conditions and went ahead and took the
Yes.
service. That terms and conditions said the jurisdiction is USA. So court asked, you being a government of Kerala, how did you accept the jurisdiction to be New York or something like that? So most of these website contracts, if we blindly click I accept, we are actually accepting the jurisdiction of the other courts. In the privacy issue, I have seen a number of standard contract clauses where Indian people are simply agreeing to contracts. One of the things is this jurisdiction, apart from other things. Very difficult to get it enforced, but they agree. And if a case is filed in New York, even to hire a lawyer to even attend the hearing, that will be costing these Indian companies much more than what they can put at stake. So, as a solution, at least in the data protection area where there is going to be a data protection authority, that data protection authority has to somehow bring some kind of a protection so that this extra jurisdictional thing do not adversely affect small companies. This is what I have been telling. Like an umbrella protection has to be given to Indian data processors because of such kind of contracts.
Correct.
Okay, anyway, some of these thoughts, there are other lawyers here. I'm sure Limaye has got some views.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam. It was very informative. But right, might is the right. That's what
yeah,
all right.
Correct.
Yeah, sir. I was sharing same view because execution is absolutely difficult.
Yeah.
Even if we discuss about just enforcement, execution is totally different and difficult. So this issue will remain, and what umbrella suggestion is there, that should be implemented. That is the only present solution what I can foresee right now.
Yeah, Rajesh has got any views? Rajesh is silent today.
No, sir. Nothing much. I think Meenal and you all have covered it. The only thing about we are more relying on MLATs, but MLATs has its own problems. And if you could remember, even when we were talking about the SEC and extraterritorial questions, we were referring to how we will implement it in India. I mean, Indian legal system is also not an exception. It also has its own, the EP processes that goes long and long, and the Indian legal system is also very high. So I think that's something which it's good to think that every country should come together, but I think it goes back to its own political agenda and public policy.
Yeah.
I have a doubt. This is Vasantika here.
Yeah.
You brought out those principles that have been applied by the US courts.
Yes.
Various principles. So, do you know of any country that applied the doctrine of renvoi and applied those principles to see whether jurisdiction holds or not, or it's
Canada uses the same principles. From what I understand is that Canada, they call it substantial connection test.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually, when you go in the depths of any good developed countries, tests, etc., finally they all boil down to one thing, which is reasonability. So they can make the tests tighter and tighter, but every time finally it is a judge who's taking a call, right? So he can introduce more and more elements in the test, but finally it is what he has decided in his head that whether this business is substantial connection. So in Canada, they call it substantial connection test. So while if you go into the definition of that test, it pretty much is very similar to the sliding scale test and the effects test that was laid down by the US, and of course the same test currently is also used in India.
Okay,
This
very nice. Thank
recent
you.
Google cases also are important. That is GDPR case on Google. Rajesh, say, one of those cases in France, they said that the search engine in France cannot, the jurisdiction of GDPR will apply, but search engines elsewhere can use it. The Indian court,
That's right.
I think it is still working on that. In Ramdev's case, this was quoted. There has been a lot of discussions, and Delhi High Court has given one ruling in this Ramdev's case also, which is very interesting. I don't know whether internationally it will sustain, but what they said was they tried to, there is a Delhi High Court distinguished where the server is available from where the upload is taking place. I think that was a
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, sir. I remember. It's a global, this one blocking they have said. Global blocking means it should not be available to anybody across the globe.
Yeah.
I think it has gone beyond all possibilities for an intermediary to work on that.
True.
That madam from Bangalore only, that Singh madam, she has passed that order, but very difficult to implement in letter and spirit, because the intermediary or the platform owner will not have that kind of access. So that's a big question mark. As you say, global blocking means global blocking. That's what she has done. But it's a very good holistic jurisdictional aspect she has discussed.
Yeah.
It's
That's
only
a
on the
very-
paper.
yeah,
It cannot be implemented.
That's a good case. One lady judge.
Yeah, she's from Bangalore only.
I see.
She
I
is married
wrote
from
about-
Punjabi.
I wrote about
She's a
that in my
teacher.
site without knowing. I have actually praised her actually.
It's a wonderful judgment, sir.
But I don't know. It will go to Supreme Court. I think it must have already gone to Supreme Court. So we have to wait and see. But very interesting, this jurisdiction thing.
Exactly.
I'm sure Miguel has made
I
it,
think somebody already gave the judge name, Justice Pratibha Singh.
Pratibha Singh.
Yes. Pratibha Singh.
Justice Pratibha Singh used to have her own practice, Singh and Singh, and she was recently just 3 years back, she was appointed as a judge.
Yeah.
She was our contemporary in Bangalore Law College.
Oh,
That's
very
why I
good.
remember her.
Oh, very good. Very good.
Slightly senior, not that senior, younger. I was senior, much senior. In Bangalore Law College, she was there. I was in BMS. Law.
Yeah, it was in October 2019. The case has, I think, later gone to the Supreme Court now. That detail has been discussed on my site navi.org as of October 31st, 2019. But it is a very interesting case, and they also discussed this Google CNIL case also there.
I will certainly go through.
Yeah, others, any other? I'm sure that some of the technical people would have found the session a little too hard.
Legal, too legal.
Okay.
Did you find the presentation too legal? Not.
Yeah, I understand that.
Oh.
But legal people would have really enjoyed it anyway. That is always the issue.
I tried my best to say it in layman's terms as much as possible.
We are not laymen, no. We are technical. Only way to understand.
Actually,
But,
I have a small question here, Navi sir and Minal ma'am. See, due to hyper-globalization, the immutable truth is e-contracts are going to go up. I mean, they're going to like exponentially grow. There's no doubt about that. And maybe they have a technical question like non-repudiation and all. The digital signature has that, robust encryption. That is one thing. When I heard this, Consumer Protection Act in India is already in effect since July 20th. And I see like there is a challenge. I might, when rubber hits the road, you can say, right, is it could be, did our government conduct any feasibility study like, consumers are spread across India, companies based out of Bangalore. I mean, like, it's going to be, I think, a practical challenge for them. Did they really do any study on the ground before they, rolled it? I'm talking about the Consumer Protection Act 2020 July, I think it came into effect, right?
Right.
And I see there is, I'm
Just a
not
minute,
sure about that you are the law background person. And did they do the feasibility study on the ground? I mean, did they collect the feedback from the stakeholders, interested parties?
Yeah, I think they did that. In fact, for the last 1 or 2 years, they were doing that. And, that is the reason they have included that video conferencing aspect there. So anybody can, file from anywhere. That's one. I will tell you one more worry, in fact, or rather they might do that, they will slowly, if this succeeds, then they will slowly get into the telecom angle also, because there are many service providers who provide service from outside India. That is going to be the bigger axe, which they will grind once this works out.
Good, good. Another thing, when it comes for the jurisdiction, right? Some courts, I'm not sure, as a layman, I'm asking you, don't you think there's going to be a splitting up that, power or, work or accountability between the courts? Like,
Definitely, these are options. So it's, of course, like the consumer has more than one fora that he can go to enforce his rights. Like the CPC only allows you to go and sue where dependent resides or works, or where the cause of action has arisen. But the consumer protection, the new law, also gives the option to sue where you reside. So these are the options of the fora that are present before you. And of course, you can choose any one. So all three will have jurisdiction. Yeah. It's not that, only these has. These are or. So you can go and sue. So there is an overlap. And of course there is, but these are choices that are provided.
Yeah, we are becoming.
Always, I think I see the judgment is made, right? The plaintiff is the beneficiary, I feel. Always benefit of doubt is given to the plaintiff. I feel like, I have to choose this, my jurisdiction. If there is somebody based out of Pennsylvania, I said, because this, website was doing couple of, transactions through customer, I want that jurisdiction to be, from Pennsylvania. I feel courts are a little bit inclined towards the plaintiffs. That's what my, maybe wrong perception.
No,
decide the jurisdiction, right? Like, so somebody's from Arizona and, somebody's from Pennsylvania, petitioner is from Pennsylvania. So do you think that like maybe there is an influence of the plaintiff based out of Pennsylvania, you can have that jurisdiction, something like that? Am I clear? Am I coming through, Minal? Like,
I could understand some bit Pennsylvania and then you...
No, the plaintiff is based out of Pennsylvania and he's suing some company based out of Arizona. And
if you are in Pennsylvania and you are suing someone based out of Arizona, that's what...
Arizona. And that website may be active or passive, but sometimes I see that, maybe the, judges are using this common laws or previous, decisions and take the side of the plaintiffs because of some reasons. In a practical way, I'm saying that. Maybe something is not written in the book. They use their own thing and then decide. Do you think it happens sometimes, or like it's like they go by that?
Of course, it can. See, at the end of the day, unless robo judges come, which are happening, right? It's not a joke. Actually, there are two countries that have sort of introduced robo judges who don't have any subjectivity in their mind. Unless it's a human being taking a decision, there could be background noise in their head and they can be using things that they probably will not explicitly say but are going on in their head. So of course that human bias, and it's not really their fault, it's how human beings are. So of course I completely agree with you. Unless robo judges are sort of I just attended a conference before COVID where I had met a lot of people from New Zealand, a lot of lawyers there, etc., and a few more countries, where they were talking about that how they have fed all the judgments into the robot, right? And the robot now knows everything that is there to know, and now basis only the data that is fed inside it, will it decide the further, like the matter that is before him. But of course, in that, then something else is lost, which is compassion and sympathy. But these are competing sort of, these are issues that have to choose some vices and let some, virtues prevail. So
Thanks, Minal.
Thank you, Minal.
Yeah. So Navisa, one quick thing, Minal, probably you can. It's been a long time getting back into the legal, refreshing memories on this. earlier when this jurisdiction and all these issues, I think there were a lot of e-commerce people in certain point of time between 2010 to 2015, they were actually issuing mandatory alternate dispute resolution, like mandatory arbitration and all those things, so that people don't go to courts. This is, am I correct, right? This is
No,
something
you're
was
absolutely
happening.
correct. So even in ADR, there, at least in the contracts that I draft, and generally a lot of people, a lot of my peers, and even a lot of international contracts, they definitely they definitely provide for a mandatory mediation or a conciliation process, because you know, there are many times, and they say that, you know, the head of this company and the head of this company, they will come together and they will try to solve the dispute for 30 days. And if that fails, will you move to an arbitration or a litigation? So see, litigation is no one's friend other than the people who are extremely rich. So you know, it is always prudent to first try and solve it on a cordial basis. That's pretty much the advice that you will find every non-litigation lawyer giving you. Of course, litigation lawyer won't.
Yeah, but in an e-commerce scenario, normally the person who will be suing will be the one who will be like a normal customer, a consumer who may not.
So there the mediation is a tough one, right? Because you are going by yourself and you are pretty much and generally you will see that they designate his decisions are, and how you think about, how you approach this problem that you're facing and how he approaches it will be different. And hence every time mediation may not work. And that's why you have an arbitration.
Okay, thank you, Meenal. I
Great.
think we spent enough time. It was a very interesting session. A lot of questions have come in the minds of people. It's good. Let them keep thinking about it. Let us address this sometime later with specific reference to the privacy laws also. Maybe after a gap of a couple of months, people like Rajesh can help us in doing something on that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And if
Thank you.
okay, we will end this session. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all. Thanks, Meenu. Thanks a lot.
Thank you everyone for spending your valuable time and evening.
Good presentation, Meenal.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Navisa.
Bye.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
You take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.